Brilliant. So I'm very excited to be speaking at this event today, and I'm especially excited about the title of this conference. Now, normally I would channel an ad-lib talk, but if I was ever to do a PhD, then this would be the title of what I would write about, which means I have so much to say on this subject and have spent the last 20 years exploring this question. So I'm going to be sharing lots of information with you in a short amount of time, which means I've written this talk, including even the introduction. So forgive me for reading, but I wanted to be succinct, which is not something that I'm famous for. So strap in, but also I would love for you to get in touch with me and ask questions. If you're seeing this recording, I am in Norway and I'm being a birth doula to my friend, and it means she'll be in labour, and so I can't be there. If I am there, I'll be doing this talk and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. If I'm doing the recording, then I'd love it if you sent your questions to me, because I would really love to connect more and talk about these subjects because they are so important to me. Okay, so because we're at a Gatekeepers Trust conference, I'm focusing on the pilgrimages that I walked in the last couple of years, but these are part of a much wider body of work. So that's why I'm having to try and be succinct. So yeah, do get in touch with me or look up my work online. I'll give you all the details at the end. Okay, so I'm going to share a slideshow with you. Great. So during September this year and into the first week of October, 6 pilgrims and I walked along the St. Michael line towards Kenlebole in Cornwall on a hike that we called the Strolling Mummers Pilgrimage for Unity. We started with an opening performance at Dragon Hill in Uffington, where last year, almost to the day, we held a ceremony with local wisdom keeper Chris Parks, as we walked from London to COP26 in Glasgow, travelling up the Spine of Albion ley line. This one runs from Culver Down, or Peace Hill, on the Isle of Wight, to Hope Bay at the top of Scotland. So these 2 pilgrimages have seen us draw a St. George's cross over the land, following 2 powerful ley lines, massaging the land with our intentions, our feet, and our ceremonies. Our walk last year was called Listening to the Land, Pilgrimage for Nature, and our intention was to hear what the people we met along the way had to say about climate change, and if they had any messages they wanted us to relay to the delegates at the UN Climate Conference. 28 people joined me on this pilgrimage, walking 500 miles in total. We did make a recording of the song. And along the route, we developed a performance, which we presented in the Green Zone at COP26. And we also began to learn how to listen to the land, observing the ways in which it looked and how it was being treated. But also, we began to participate in a 2-way dialogue with the land, as we realised it was asking what it could do to help us, rather than the other way around. Humanity is making the land inhospitable for ourselves and for all the other living creatures that we share this land with. But once we're gone, the land will be able to heal itself. It will have millions, billions of years to do so. Beginning to hear the land was a profound experience for all of us, and in many ways quite harrowing. We all took a long time to integrate the experience. I myself suffered a breakdown in Glasgow when I discovered the politicians had flown away in helicopters and little had been achieved. I later found out that it had been generally agreed by EU leaders that they weren't willing to give Boris Johnson the satisfaction of achieving anything at COP26 because of Brexit. So hopefully more will be achieved at COP27 in Egypt this year. But our performance and even my breakdown felt like we brought a big slice of heart to COP26. We brought tears to the event and performed improvisations that shared our experiences of each of the 4 elements that we'd encountered on our journey. Through poetry, song, movement, music, and hidden ceremonial power, we successfully captured some of the experiences on the pilgrimage and some of the messages we had heard from the people we'd encountered and those from the land we had walked. Most importantly, though, it felt like our footsteps and the ceremonies we performed at the chakra points of Albion's spine had a truly healing effect on the land, and that it was grateful. When we reached Hope Bay and held the final crown chakra performance, we drove through a double rainbow to get there, and the ends hovered over the land, which was golden with autumnal bracken. At the coast, the land curved around the bay like a dragon, and when we finished the closing ceremony, we heard 7 claps of thunder, even though there was no rain or lightning. Although it took a lot out of all of us and a long time to recover, all of the pilgrims experienced miracles in their lives upon their return, in the form of dream jobs, better houses, loving partners, and life goals coming true. It was as if we were all thanked in some way for the work that we did. As we walked this year, we were performing a mummers play called St. George and His Many Enemies. Written using several historical sources, the play is an amalgamation of a few remaining recorded mummers plays that were penned down in the Victorian times, but that displayed regional differences, alluding to an older oral tradition. One of the things that came to our attention on our last walk was the idea of re-indigenisation. The theatre practice that I've spent most of my years training in is called fooling. And this is a form of sacred theatre that feels like the most direct lineage from the earliest forms of showmanship, which was born from the performances of the shamans or the medicine folks of old. In Rogan Taylor's seminal work, The Death and Resurrection Show, he talks of how ever since humans gained consciousness and were able to experience or fear the past and the future, we also began to fear death and have sought ways to avoid it. If someone managed to survive a fever from an illness or infection, we wanted to know how this had been achieved, as spoken language was limited and it's not even the language of the inner world anyway, which is the realm of dreams and metaphors. The death survivors tried to express their experiences through movement, dance, and storytelling and art. This is where all art originates from. So after a short time, the art itself began to be seen as a healing tool and healing in essence. And this power and magic is still inherent in show business today, even though it's a very cheaper version of it. Fooling, however, is the most direct lineage from the shaman, and yet it's the least well-known art form, which is interesting as it slipped through the cracks. Fooling is it's like in the tarot card where you see the fool stepping off the cliff into the unknown, and you just, when you're performing it, you have to learn to trust that when you fool, you'll fly. So one of our most profound practices is circle plays, where we hold a ceremonial space and each person takes it in turns to go into the middle and be witness as we explore our inner worlds. As we relive experiences, we play all of the parts, including even playing the inanimate objects that were present, which means that we then see the story of our lives from a multitude of perspectives, healing traumas and allowing us to move on from memories that were holding us back. Many of the pilgrims on both last year and this year's walks are people I know from the fooling community, and we spent a lot of time last year especially teaching and practicing fooling along our journey. So this has become an inherent part of what we're doing. Joanna Macy writes in her landmark inquiry, Active Hope, which explores how we find hope in these difficult times, that there were 3 threads to the Great Turning, as she coined it. The first is activism. So scientists and journalists putting pressure on the business as usual narrative to slow things down and attempt to reverse the effects of what's happening. Secondly, there's systemic change, which is happening incrementally through businesses creating sustainability policies and increases in organic farming practices, recycling, etc. Then there's the need for consciousness shifting, the stories we tell ourselves and that weave our reality together. This is where the idea of re-indigenisation comes in. Part of the process that disconnected us from the land was the loss of our folk traditions and customs. These traditions were deeply connected to the land's cycles as we became dispossessed of our common land, less controlled by the seasons and harvests and more urbanised. So our traditions became irrelevant and fell by the wayside. By reclaiming and remembering and reinventing our folk culture, we are rebuilding positive relationships with the natural world and our right to live and thrive in harmony with the land that we are part of. Mummers' plays are traditionally performed on May Day and Christmas. Often they contain a skit where the land gets resurrected, suggesting a connection to a deeper mystery that the plays used to be rites performed to and for the land as fertility rituals. It was interesting that during our pilgrimage this year, we saw 3 prime ministers and 2 monarchs. Whether this was due to us performing this powerful play on sacred sites along the St. Michael ley line, it's irrelevant, as our intention is to create mystery and wonder. So myths start somewhere, and as the cord to our Indigenous culture has been cut, we must start again. In The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr, he looks at how stories can change our very behaviour. In Fooling, we have a saying, which is create or be created. With the work that we're doing, we are weaving a new narrative into the fabric of our culture. Rather than the guilty rod narrative of beating ourselves up about recycling, eating meat or driving, then this approach is the carrot narrative of being deeply and hopelessly in love with the earth, which changes our behaviour through love rather than guilt. Performance, festival, celebration, ritual all help us to connect deeper to the land in this loving and reverential way. In the version of the play that the strolling mummers were performing, we see St. George fight with the dragon. St. Michael, the archangel whose ley line we were walking, was also a dragon slayer. So on our pilgrimage, many of the churches we passed by had stained glass windows to both St. Michael and St. George. George is normally seen slaying the dragon, but Michael is often depicted pointing at the dragon with a long spear, as if he's asking us to pay attention to something. This could be interpreted as him pointing to the savage, animal, instinctive part of ourselves, the part of us that is infinite, is one with the land and everyone and everything else in this whole world and the universe beyond. This is the part of us that is the fool, that makes love, gives birth, makes music, performs theatre. It is without judgment, without thinking, without criticism. In ancient Chinese culture, ley lines were called dragon lines, and only emperors were allowed to build on them, so no one else could utilise their power. In Aborigine culture, ley lines were called song lines, and these were songs created by the ancestors that sung the land into being. So telling stories of how like Witchetty Grub pushed his way up from beneath the land, creating a mountain range. And then somewhere else, Coyote took a piss, creating a watering hole. The first time the baby kicks in the mother's womb, she remembers where she is standing and goes and tells the elders. They'll know from where she was which song line had jumped up through the mother's legs and kick-started the baby into life. The baby is not born of the family or the tribe, but of its songline. And when it's older, it will go and walkabout and use the song as a map to find their way through the outback, knowing where the next watering hole, food and shelter can be found based on the song. One of the main stories is about the rainbow serpent. They believe that when they see a rainbow, it is the serpent travelling through the sky from one watering hole to another. Apparently, the Michael ley line travels all the way around the world, connecting to the rainbow serpent line in Australia. In this simple and silly mummers play of St. George, who represents the land of Albion, we see that by not dealing with this shadow part of himself, his inner dragon, he begins to imagine evil out in the world in the form of Beelzebub, which once he's banished him, he then sees evil in the form of the feminine, seen through Mary Tinker. Then once he's banished her, he sees evil in the form of the other, specifically the Muslim Saracen knight, who brings about his downfall. Then a hippie lefty herbalist comes along and brings St. George, all the land, back to life again, using the healing herb Ella campaign and a magical incantation, thus restoring harmony until the cycle begins again. This is the folk tale of our land, and it's been told and performed for hundreds of years. It's hard not to feel a bit like history is repeating itself. Is the folk tale creating the story, or has the story created the folk tale? So we wanted to know, how can we break this cycle? How can we learn to see our enemies as ourselves? And how can we stop creating enemies? So these were the questions that we asked the people as we walked the land. And what we found was that we were blown away by how generous and kind people were to us. Folks from different demographics and echo chambers to ourselves, people who seemed like the enemy across social media algorithms and mainstream media news reports, but who in the actual flesh were kind, emotional, everyday, beautiful beings who helped us immeasurably and shared their own vulnerability with us when they saw how vulnerable we were being. We also discovered how people are mobilising. So community gardens, shops, libraries, organic farms, protest movements, economic transport, fashion alternatives are springing up all over the place. Most people are not acting like it's business as usual at all. And most people aren't waiting for Westminster to sort things out for them. They're doing it themselves. The Great Turning, as Joanna Macy describes it, is well and truly underway, which means that there is hope, active hope, and it just needs enough of us to fan the flames and push the scales in the other direction for our course to change. I truly believe that this epoch in our history is the next chapter in our evolution, a story that will tell of how the climate crisis reunited the inner and the outer worlds once more, making everything we do an act of worship and all life sacred, where we untwisted the twisted twin, the fool or the dragon, our inner demon, reuniting it with a shining night version of ourselves that we present to the world, so that we all stand fully in our power with open hearts and minds. There is only one eternity, and we are all part of it, both the outer and the inner worlds. So the symbol of infinity is a sideways figure of 8. And those 2 circles represent the inner and outer. When we're fooling, performing, creating, making love, or watching a sunset, then we are in the moment, and that sphincter in the middle, which is our ego, is untwisted, and the inner and outer become one. So the lemonscape becomes a circle, which is why the Fool is the 0 card at the top of the tarot deck. So in this space, anything is possible, and we are all one, liberated from our egos. We have achieved so much in the outer world, but it has reached its limits and is now destroying itself. It's time to invite back in the inner world, to give our lives meaning and reconnect us to the infinite that we're all part of. I mean, even in the outer world, like the furthest outreaches of our work now is quantum physics, and that basically goes back into inner world stuff, you know, so we're kind of leaping back in even scientifically. So to remember we are one with the whole of humanity, all living things, the planet and the cosmos. It's time to come home to ourselves and get to the heart of the matter, and there is no heart without art. So exactly this time last year, the pilgrimage to Glasgow finished, and we did our closing ceremony up at Hope Bay. It's just been coming up in my Facebook memories, and I felt like the palimpsest of this memory has been overlaying the last few weeks. And from seeing that ceremony appear on my Facebook, I felt released from what was a really lengthy regathering and integration process, because it was a biggie. That was a big piece of work, but was so worth it. And I'm so in love with all the pilgrims that I walked with. I am so in love with life, and I'm so in love with this land. And it was such a joy to do. Now, COP27 is taking place currently in Egypt. And my hopes are that, you know, stuff happens. Not holding my breath. But what I do feel is that there is a huge shift taking place in hearts across the globe. So we've been groomed to become individuals and individualistic, because in doing so, it's been easier to make us feel hollow and like we need things, you know, to buy things to make us feel complete. This wasn't totally a grand plan, but has unfolded through the ideas of certain individuals who did purposely and knowingly do this to us. So we've been consciously manipulated. But there is a dark and light to all coins. And the light side of this way of being is that the awakening that I've been experiencing in the last decade and have seen lighting up in the eyes of people around me means that instead of us waiting for a new leader or a knight in shining armor to come in and save us with one narrative that we all get behind, that we're all stepping into our own sovereignty and our own narratives and finding our own power. So they have for a long time been a many-headed beast, hiding within corporations and governments. So we can't just take it down by removing a single person. Well, through their manipulation, they've created their counterpart, and we're becoming a many-headed beast who is remembering it has a soul, that it's magnificent and is lucky to be alive, is grateful, and through its individuality and selfishness, it's expanding to include the whole universe in that selfishness, because we are all one. So yeah, I'm an individual, but my wanting things for myself and wanting things to be the way I want them to be includes everything and everyone. So my selfishness is infinite. So every second, every cell, everything in this beautiful universe is divine, and we're all full of beauty, and we're all full of wonder. Who does not contain within them worlds unimagined? A we that includes every rock, every animal, every plant, and we are rising. The inner world is rising. She's been sleeping a long time, but she's buzzing, well rested, and ready to get to work. So it's time to dream, and let's dream big. So thank you ever so much. It's been lovely to be here. If you want to get in touch with me, it's www.kriyaarts.co.uk, which is KRIYAARTS, Kriya Arts. And Kriya is Sanskrit for the completion of an action. So it's kind of like the eureka moment when you break karma. Karma is the repetition of patterns, and Kriya is that like eureka moment where you change things up. So all of the work that I do is about popping those old patterns and making something new happen. So on Instagram, Facebook, I'm Kriya Arts, and I'd love to hear from you. If you want to get in touch with me by email, it's Jolie, Jolie, my name, jolie@kriyaarts.co.uk. So I'd love to hear from you and keep this conversation going. And I hope the rest of the day's going well. And I'm in the middle of birthing a baby, supporting my friend. So new life, new things are always happening. So yeah, lots of love. Take care. Bye.